Hi. So this one's maybe a little bit different. I intend this to be a sort of semi-educational video. And the events I'm going to be talking about in this video briefly um, are already known, although some of them perhaps not as well known as perhaps they should be. Um, and it's something that has always struck me, as someone who follows things that are going on in the world and domestically. This is something that's always struck me and doesn't seem to get a lot of commentary, which I find peculiar because it is quite striking. And what I'm talking about is the fact that in the United Kingdom, over a period of about 5 years, from the mid 80s to the late 80s, we seem to have an exceptional number of high profile disasters. Um, I'm talking about structural accidents, fires, terrorist incidents, um, tragedies. And many of these things came within weeks of one another, but all of them over a 5 year period from 1985 to 1989. Now, for this video, I'm just focusing on the UK, although obviously there were things going on in other parts of the world. I think it's notable that all of this happened in this country over such a short period of time, relatively short period of time. And yes, there have been sort of disasters in other eras, but this particular period, I'm going to go through some of the events from my research, and it's just striking. Um, and as far as I can tell, no one's really commented on this before. So here it goes. I'm just going to go through the 5 years and some of the major incidents that happened. I say incidents as a collective term because they were all different, but they all involve significant loss of life. And yeah, so without further ado, 1985. The year 1985, first of all, saw, and this isn't going to be precise chronological order, but I'll go in year order anyway. The Bradford City Fire. So this was a football stadium disaster on the old stands at the Valley Parade Stadium in Bradford. And someone dropped a cigarette, and within minutes, the entire stadium was an inferno, and sadly, 56 people died. I used to be in an organization called the YFA, the Young Firefighters Association, and we actually watched that video as a sort of training technique to show how fire spreads. At the time, you could see people in the video even laughing and so on because they obviously didn't realize how serious this was. But there was some shocking footage. The video is quite well known. There's shocking footage of police officers desperately trying to throw their coats over people, officers on fire. It was horrendous. Um, so the Bradford City Fire, 56 people perished in that tragedy, and it led to a redesign in football stadiums. The same year, and this is one that I think's been largely forgotten, the Manchester plane fire. Not to be confused with the earlier Manchester plane crash involving Manchester United in 1958. This one was an incident at Manchester Airport. I believe it was a fire on I think it was a British Midland plane. I'm not 100% sure about that. But basically, 55 people died in that disaster. And in my view, it's been largely forgotten. So the Manchester Airport tragedy, I'll call it. 1986, the Sumburgh helicopter disaster. This still ranks as Britain's worst helicopter disaster. This was a British international flight. It was a Chinook helicopter, and I believe it was traveling from Aberdeen. Um, and it came down in Sumburgh, which I understand is one of the islands up there, or one of the smaller heliports. About 45 people died. This was 1986. It remains Britain's worst helicopter disaster. And later in 1994, there was another disaster involving a Chinook helicopter, which sadly killed 29 soldiers. But in this disaster, this was a civilian disaster. Actually, it was carrying, I believe, oil rig workers, and some 45 of them were killed in this tragedy. 1987, the Herald of Free Enterprise sinking, also known as the Seabrugge disaster. This was a ferry travelling from the Belgian port of Zeebrugge to the UK on a night, I should say. I think it was the 6th of March, 1987, which was actually the same day my sister-in-law was born. Um, and basically, it was quite a stormy night. The compartment doors of the ferry hadn't been closed properly. A lot of people were enjoying a holiday. Compliments of the Sun newspaper, they'd won tokens for this trip, and sadly, this disaster occurred. The ship capsized, and some 193 people perished in that disaster. One of the worst ever disasters on the English Channel. So the Herald of Free Enterprise sinking. The same year, there was a terrorist incident in the town of Enniskillen in Northern Ireland, also known as the Remembrance Sunday attack by the Provisional IRA, um, in which some 12 people were killed at a bombing on Remembrance Sunday in the small market town of Enniskillen in County Fermanagh. Um, Also in 1987, Hungerford, Berkshire, which I think ranks as Britain's worst mass shooting along with Dunblane. 17 people killed in a mass shooting in the town of Hungerford in Berkshire. 1987, still in 1987, the King's Cross Fire, of course, in London. And again, it's involved wooden escalator. Like I said, the Bradford City disaster involved wooden stands. This involved a wooden escalator. Rubbish had piled up. Someone dropped a cigarette, and unfortunately, it became an inferno. There's been a few documentaries on this, on Seconds from Disaster, I believe, and other documentaries, and some 31 people died. It was one of the worst ever disasters on the London Underground. Terrible incidents. It was basically an inferno that people were trapped in. Um, so then into 1988, Clapham Junction railway collision. This was a collision between two trains at Clapham Junction in South London, which is a very busy transit station. Some 35 people died. Um, Also in the year 1988, one of our worst ever disasters, the Piper Alpha oil rig disaster. So this was an oil rig in the North Sea, um, and basically there was a malfunction in the system. I won't get into the technical side of it. That's there's been documentaries, several documentaries made about this, but some 167 men perished in that incident, that tragedy. Some 220 men were on the rig. For me, it's one of the worst because they really were isolated. You know, their only choice was to jump into the freezing, oily water. It must have been hellish. And there's some news footage showing a lot of these men, burned in the hospital in Aberdeen. Um, so that was a Piper Alpha fire, and it actually ranks as Britain's worst structural fire. Sometimes it's said that Grenville was the worst, but actually, technically, it was Piper Alpha in terms of the death toll. 167 men killed in that tragedy. Also in 1988, Britain's worst ever terrorist attack, the Lockerbie bombing, which really needs no introduction. It's well documented. Um, my parents live near the town of Lockerbie in Scotland, and there's a memorial there. It's very poignant. So this was mostly American passengers, also included Britons and other nationalities. But basically, the plane was blowing up in the air over the small town of Lockerbie in Scotland. It crashed. Had such an impact on that community. 11 townspeople also died, and for years afterwards, people had post-traumatic stress, and there was a real atmosphere, I believe, in that town for a long time afterwards. There was a shocking image of the nose of the plane, which was actually quite intact, but that was kind of the defining image. And in the year 2003, Muammar Gaddafi took responsibility whilst denying he ordered the attack. He nevertheless, his government paid out to the victims. There are still unanswered questions about that, but it remains Britain's worst terrorist attack, or rather, the worst terrorist attack on British soil. 270 deaths in the Lockerbie bombing. Then, very shortly afterwards, that was December 1988. Shortly afterwards, just a few weeks later, in January 1989, another incident involving a plane, this time a flight from Belfast to East Midlands Airport. which is now known as the Kegworth air disaster or the M1 plane crash. I understand at the time the pilot was praised for diverting the plane away from the town of Kegworth. Um, Actually, I think Market Harborough was one of the nearest sizable towns. Um, Nevertheless, 47 people died, and it's known as the M1 plane crash. Um, in 1989, another IRA atrocity, provisional IRA atrocity, the Deal Barracks in Kent was bombed and 11 soldiers were killed. And then finally, 1989, well, not finally, two more disasters to mention. Hillsborough, again, needs no introduction, it's very well documented. There was a crash at the Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest, and 96 Liverpool fans were crushed to death, which caused a great deal of controversy over the handling of the tragedy by South Yorkshire Police and the coverage by the Sun newspaper. Don't need to introduce that, well documented. And finally, in London again, on the River Thames, a collision between the Marchioness and the Bowbell. The Marchioness was a pleasure boat, and the Bowbell was a paddle steamer. I believe this was a party that was going on. It was late at night, and they collided, and some 51 people drowned. So all of those disasters, 14 major incidents, all within 5 years of one another. I don't think that's surpassed in modern British history, and it's something that I find really striking. I mean, you could get any year, you'll find tragedies, but I can't think in my lifetime of any period where there has been so many over a relatively short period of time. Having said that, the year 2017 had some echoes of that. In the year 2017, of course, we had the Manchester bombing, the London Bridge attack, the Westminster attack, and the Grenfell fire, all within the year 2017. So that's maybe comparable. Um, but yeah, I mean, some of those disasters are better documented than others, like Hillsborough, Lockerbie are very well documented. But some of the others, I mean, the Manchester airport disaster, I don't think is very well remembered today, which is sad because 55 people died. Um, so some seem to be better remembered than others. Um, but anyway, let me know if you have any personal connections to any of those disasters and if you remember them maybe firsthand. I was a bit young to remember them firsthand. I was only a toddler at the time, but a lot of them led to changes. For example, both Bradford and Hillsborough led to changes in how stadiums were designed and how football matches were organised. I mean, how the safety procedures were dealt with. King's Crossfire led to safety changes of the London Underground, where the old wooden escalators were replaced. Um, I would also say, incidentally, the Sumburgh helicopter disaster has also been somewhat forgotten. Doesn't seem to be well remembered today, but 45 people died. So, let's not forget the victims of all these tragedies. And let me know your thoughts if you have any personal memories or maybe connections with any of these tragedies. And thanks for watching.